Hello and welcome to the A-List. Today I'm joined by ninja, circus performer, expert in everything bendy, Mr. Alvin Tam.
Hello.
Hey buddy, how's it going?
How you doing?
Yeah, I'm really, really good. Thanks for coming.
My pleasure.
So I want to ask you a bunch of questions about your journey. I mean, I know you a little bit. I know you're pretty good in some areas, but I think there's a lot of mystery in and around some of your life and how you've got to where you've gotten.
Mm-hmm.
So how long have you been in the Okanagan now?
6 years.
And before that?
Then right from Las Vegas, 12 years in Vegas. And then prior to that, 12 years in Montreal. And then 18 years in Edmonton, where I'm born and raised.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Great. So some of us know that you have been a circus performer or are a circus performer. That's something that I thought I was going to get into when I was young, but I completely didn't understand what I was saying. So maybe walk us through a little bit about how did you arrive there and how did that journey start?
Well, that's a great question of how I became a circus performer. It goes all the way back to when I was 18 and I was in Edmonton. I was born and raised there. And I got into theater when I was in high school. And the other thing that I was really interested in was learning French. So those were my two main passions coming out of high school. And one thing I knew I wanted to do is I wanted to learn French. So I started looking for universities and post-secondary education that was taught in French. And I thought Montreal would be a great place to look. So I started looking at places in Montreal just to do anything at all. And then what happened was I started auditioning for theater schools and then a music school. And then somebody said, hey, why don't you, you like theater, why don't you audition for this circus school? And I was like, circus? I don't want to do circus. I
Oh,
don't
so you hadn't
care.
thought about it before?
No, never,
Oh,
not
wow.
before I was
Okay.
18, at all. And I got the phone number of this circus school in Montreal and I called them. And the only question I asked on the phone was, do you teach in French or English? And they said, French. So I said, okay, great, I'll apply. And at that moment, the administrator said, well, today's the last day. You're in Edmonton, we're in Montreal. You can send a videotape, but today's the last day to actually apply. And I said, I almost put the phone down, which would have completely changed my life. And I said, well, okay, I'll put together a videotape. I had no aspirations to become a circus performer. I put together a videotape because my background was in martial arts. When I was younger, I did martial arts, so that's why I became a ninja on your project. And I ended up sending the videotape, doing a few kata, but I did it all in French. And I was accepted into the school. When I got the acceptance letter 3 months later, I read it and said, you've been accepted into the basic training program at the National Circus School. And I said, yay, I'm going to Montreal to learn French. So that's how my circus journey started.
Wow. So martial arts, what martial art did you start in?
Well, when I was younger, when I was 8 or 9, I started in praying mantis kung fu, and then I started doing white crane kung fu, and that teacher was also teaching kickboxing. So we started mixing it up with kickboxing and boxing, and a little bit of details like those kind of disciplines. Then when I was in my 20s, I started doing a self-defense training where we did grappling and scenario-based training. We'd go out into the hallways to fight and outside and, multiple attackers. And then later on when I was in Vegas, I did a few years of Krav Maga where it was, very scenario-based stuff too.
That's really cool. So we'll circle back on that, but I'm just really curious, where did this love of French come from?
You know what? I love languages, and I realized a long time ago why I love languages. It's, I love just the challenge of learning a language, but what it really does is it opens a door to understanding a group of people or a culture. And even though I spent so many years in the circus, probably 15 years touring professionally, what I realized was the circus was actually a vehicle for me to pursue my deeper passion, which was getting to know cultures and people around the world. And when I was 16, 17, I loved learning about different countries and meeting people from different places around the world. I just loved it. I just knew I loved that part. And I thought, man, it would be so great to get to know people. And the best way I started to discover was to learn their language. So once you speak their language, even if it's very basic and rudimentary, they open up to you, right? And they invite you into their homes, into their events, and all that kind of stuff. And then what it turned out was the circus allowed me to travel around the world, and we'd go with a show, and we'd go right to the heart of that city's artistic center and perform there. And then all of a sudden we were part of a arts festival, and then we would be part of some sort of other event to celebrate the arts in that culture or in that country or city, wherever I was at. And the circus basically became a vehicle for me to go and learn about the world.
And what's your heritage?
Well, my heritage is Chinese. So both my parents are from Hong Kong, and they immigrated to Canada, I don't know, 30, 40 years ago.
So you're first generation.
Yeah. I'm born in Canada.
Wow. So are you trilingual, or do you speak Chinese as well?
I do. So in order of actually being good at the language, English is my first, and then French is my second. I'm fully bilingual. And then I can speak Cantonese at a decent basic level. And I also speak Portuguese, Brazilian Portuguese. I went to Brazil doing the circus, and I went in 1995 with Cirque du Soleil. But it wasn't to perform. We went to go teach children who were in the streets. And we would bring a humanitarian social program of teaching circus for street children. And so that was really a very eye-opening experience. We were teaching kids who didn't have any shelter, any food, but they would come 3 or 4 hours a day to under this outdoor tent and learn how to do circus skills, acrobatics, juggling. And at the time, I thought this was a great, maybe bit of entertainment and, something to divert their attention, the kids, because their life was so hard, so hard. We think it's tough in North America. It isn't compared to so many other places in the world. And, I got to know these kids for 3 months, and of course they don't speak English. So I learned Portuguese. And it was really fun to learn it and then play with them and teach them. And, when you leave them, it's hard because you don't know, you feel like you're giving your heart. And years later, literally 5, 6 years ago, I got a message on Facebook from 2 or 3 of these kids who had been part of that program. And they're like, "Hey, Alvin, we've become professional circus artists now, and we're traveling. This is how we make our money. I'm part of this festival. I'm a juggler. I'm an acrobat." So, that was an extremely fulfilling full circle experience.
So going back to your education, you get into the circus school because that was your entry into it. How long was the program?
Yeah, I got into the basic training program. What that looks like is 8 hours of training a day, 5 days a week, 10 months a year for 4 years. So it was a lot of training.
Yeah.
And when I got in, I was able to do 2 skills. I could do a cartwheel, and I could juggle clubs. I had learned how to juggle. I was part of a juggling club back in Edmonton.
So what do you feel was like the requirements, or what did they base your acceptance on?
I have no idea, because now if I applied to the same program, I don't think I would make it if I had the same skills back then.
Right.
I think that what they saw in my audition tape was I was fully committed. I was ready to just try anything. I was also very strong. I was running a marathon. Athletically, I was in really good shape when I was 18 and applied. And so I think they saw that. But in terms of raw skill, like acrobatics, I had none.
Wow.
So I had to learn everything from my entry into the circus school.
That's wild, because I obviously I'm seeing the not the end of the curve, but the current part of your curve in terms of your skills, and it's something that intimidating might not be the right word, but I feel like you're cut from a completely different breed, which is super cool. So what's the integration process after you? So you did the 4 years of the school,
Yeah.
and then what does it look like getting into the industry?
I was very surprised at how I went from the circus school into working professionally. And what happened for me was I did 4 years at the circus school. By the time I was at the end of my 4th year, I was already receiving offers for contracts. And I think that was particularly because the circus school is very tied in with Cirque du Soleil. Cirque du Soleil's headquarters is in Montreal also. And it's currently, and back then was also, the most well-known circus school in the world. So,
Oh, really?
yeah, I had no idea when I applied, but I managed to get into the most well-known circus school, and I didn't even know there were things not such as circus schools, right? And but there's a lot of connections. So people who have shows or projects, they were coming in to look for performers, and they'd come and make offers to the students at the circus school. So by the time I left, I already booked 2 or 3 different contracts that led me out of the school. So my first one was going to Atlantic City, where I did a summer show in a casino, and I performed all sorts of different acts, some Chinese pole stuff to acrobatics to wearing, clown costumes and weird costumes and all that kind of stuff. So it went right away from circus school right into industry work. And then my next project after that was a 3-month tour of Japan, where I was now part of a 5-person physical comedy show for children. And we toured. It was the craziest tour. It was my first major away tour as well. And we were in Japan for 90 days, and we did 85 shows in 75 cities. It was crazy.
Wow.
Crazy. But I got to see all of Japan, like everywhere, from little tiny villages to like Tokyo.
Wow.
Yeah.
So Japan, that was which contract would that be? That was close to coming out of school?
Yeah, that was, when I went to Japan, it was 3 months out of coming out of school.
Okay.
Finished in June, did my summer gig in Atlantic City. In September, October, I was already flying to Japan.
At which point do you get picked up by Cirque?
That's an interesting story in itself.
Oh, excellent.
Was so by the time I was 3/4 done my 4th year at the circus school, I had already received an offer from Cirque du Soleil to perform in Saltimbanco, which was one of their main shows back then. It was a touring show. It was very interesting. It was all over. You get to go to Asia. You get to go to South America, I think, the tour. And it was a 3-year contract. And so for me coming out of the circus school, I realized I want to experiment a little bit on my own. I don't want to get myself locked into a 3-year contract doing the same performance every night, because that's what you do. You do the same show. The show was already established, which means I would take the role of somebody who had already established all the choreography, right? I would kind of plug myself in, which is fine if that's what you want to do. I realized at that point, my aspirations coming out of a circus school, which is an art school, was to create art. I wanted to be a creator. I wanted to go ahead and be part of new projects, things that had never been created before, and be part of that creation project. So I turned down Saltimbanco. It felt like such a big deal because it's Cirque du Soleil, and they're the main player of this, the circus industry for sure. And then a few years later, not even, maybe 2 years later, 3 years later, they renewed the cast for that same show, Saltimbanco, and then they offered me another contract, and they offered more money this time. And at that time, I was just getting to a solo act, I had a solo act where I climbed a 20-foot pole. It's called a solo Chinese pole act, and I was just about to start another tour and perform that for a year. And that was my own creation. So I wanted to do that. So I had to turn Cirque du Soleil down again. I felt horrible. Yes, I turned Cirque du Soleil down again. Oh my God. And I thought, oh man, they're never going to call. And then a year later, there was another show, and they knew that I wanted to do more character stuff. So now the choreographer of the show called me, and she said, we have the perfect role for you. It's called Dralion. And it's one of the main characters, and they're going to do a lot of dance and all that kind of stuff. And I had just signed for another contract. I was going to go to Europe.
Come on.
So I turned them down again.
A third time.
Yeah. So I think it's a valuable kind of like realization for me that those opportunities, even though they feel like they come once in a lifetime, I think if you're dedicated to what you really want to create, like that's what I felt like I was doing. Like I wanted to create art. I wanted to be like, I feel like I wanted to be an artist versus taking on somebody else's creation and then emulating it. And that's okay sometimes too. But at that moment, that's what I wanted to do. And I stuck to it. And then I realized that it comes around. I get another offer. And I'm still dedicated to what I'm doing. And I was staying true to my value as an artist at that time. And then fast forward another 3 or 4 years, and I had acquired sort of a reputation in the industry as the guy who knew how to work on walls. sort of that kids physical theater show that was a wall, a moving wall, and I would do all sorts of acrobatics on it. Then I performed in a musical theater where there was a 30-foot wall, and we would do parkour all over the wall and do flips off of it. And then Ka came along, the evolution of the inspiration for Ka, which is a Cirque du Soleil show in the MGM Grand in Vegas. And the main piece of that show is a moving giant wall, but like on steroids. It's crazy. It's a $30 million wall. Just the equipment is $30 million. The whole show was $200 million. So when it was still on blueprints, one of the creative directors at Cirque du Soleil knew that I was working on all these walls and called me and said, hey, can you come in and workshop this equipment in Montreal at the headquarters? And they hired me and 2 other acrobats, and we got there, and it was a 30-foot by 15-foot wall put together with plywood and rock holds and all sorts of apparatus on it. And they said, here, you got 2 hours today, go crazy on it, see what you can come up with it. And so we did that for a number of weeks, and we did multiple projects. And so I got to workshop the equipment for this show, Ka, which was the biggest production for Cirque du Soleil today, at that point. And try all sorts of equipment, basically try and break it and try and figure out what works and what doesn't work. And then I signed the contract for Cirque du Soleil. 10 years later.
That's wild.
Yeah.
I remember watching news coverage of Ka being created and showing that wall and the movement of it, because it spins like this, right? And
does.
for anybody that hasn't been to Vegas to see a Cirque show or hasn't watched a little promo trailer on Ka, that's what you need to do in order to understand, even just a skimp of the conversation in regards to that, because it's hard to imagine.
It is hard to imagine. It was really the most technically and physically challenging show I've ever done in my life, just because of the sheer risk factor. Every time you enter the stage, there's a potential to kill yourself. Not sprain an ankle or fall off a 5-foot edge of a stage. Literally, there's a gap of 40, 50, or 80 feet. Like the heights we were working at were 120 feet. So we're up in the grid, getting ready, putting on your safeties, climbing down a ladder, getting to a piece of aerial equipment, but we were presetting 100 feet in the air, 120 feet. So everything was, extremely dangerous in terms of the execution. So.
Look, you got my brain going in a million different directions. One is I'd love to hear just maybe the scariest story, but also what do you do about fear, or do you not experience fear, or what do you do with nerves? Do you get nerves around that kind of stuff?
I definitely get nerves around everything. And it can be something that's physically dangerous or something that's emotionally challenging. I just did my first stand-up routine 2 weeks ago, and that was probably one of my most nerve-wracking experiences of my life. And I was saying to my friends that I would rather jump off a 60-foot building into an airbag than do my stand-up. So I think it's relative. I would definitely say that I experienced a lot of fear putting that show together. In every show and every circus performance, there's an element of risk and fear, which is why it's the circus.
Right.
And the scariest story, let me think about the scariest story. The scariest story that I can share in Ka was actually one of the biggest injuries I ever had in my life. So I was climbing on this moving stage, and I missed a piece of choreography, so I started slipping down the stage, which isn't a big deal. Underneath...
Is this at a live show or rehearsal?
This is a live show. And so underneath this giant stage is the world's biggest airbag on the world's biggest net, because it covers the entire area where you could potentially fall off this giant moving 50-foot by 25-foot monolith, rotating anywhere between 20 feet and 80 feet above this airbag. And the choreography was always set so that you would jump off at specific moments into an airbag and do your airbag fall, and then you'd exit, in the basement area. I started slipping off and missed my cue, and that's not a big deal. It happens, and then you just look for your exit onto the airbag. Hopefully, nobody's going to fall on top of you, and you're not going to fall on top of anyone. And I saw the airbag. I decided to just fall off into the airbag. I went through the airbag, however. There was two sets of airbags. I went through a crack in the airbag. So where they're pushed up against each other. I went through that, which normally wouldn't be an issue because then I would hit the net. But it was just close enough to a lip of concrete, and my head hit the concrete. So from about 35 feet up in the air, and my head comes smashing onto the concrete. It was a live show. I knew what happened. I was conscious, though. I pulled myself out, and then I just lay there until the medics came. So I experienced a massive concussion. So the scary part was, rehabilitating the concussion, because head injury is something that is, you got to take super seriously, obviously. So I would say that was one of the scariest experiences acrobatically. I've had a lot of like minor scares where you miss a move, you miss a flip, and you tumble into something, or I've done a lot of fire, so sometimes I burn myself on stage, and that's not fun. It's a little bit scary for sure. Or sometimes I'm up really high somewhere, 100 feet, and you're kind of fumbling with the carabiner, and you're trying to get set. So things like that. There's a lot of like minor scares, but that would be the most significant scare I've had as a performer.
Wow. Yeah. And this is why I was completely ignorant when I thought I was going to be a circus performer, because those are things that I, talking about gets me all
Yes.
irked up. So, I probably don't have the right blood to run through me. So you and I met through acting, yeah?
Yes.
How did we initially meet?
I'm trying to remember how we initially met.
I'm trying to segue into that, film acting came along for you. At which point in your life?
I think I've always been interested in doing film acting, even through my circus career. When I was performing in the circus, I had an agent in Montreal, and I would get a few contracts here and there to do some minor roles or even some stunt stuff.
In film, you mean?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I've always had an interest in film, and I would say actually, circus was secondary, because when I was in grade 9, I thought I'd become an engineer or a scientist. My brother became an engineer, and I thought I was gonna follow in that direction. And my dad suggested when I was 14, "Hey son, you should take a drama class." And I was like, "Why would I do that? Why would I take drama? I want to take science and all that stuff." And he said, "Well, if you take drama, it'll be good to help you with your public speaking whenever you have to do a speech at some point." And I took the drama class. I was grade 9, and I completely fell in love with acting. Absolutely, like hook, line, and sinker. And then I started taking arts camps after that when I was 14, 15. Then I entered a high school that was an arts high school. It was like Fame in high school. We did musicals and plays, and it was amazing. So it completely transformed my passion for the arts and theater and being on stage. So my first passion is acting. And when I went into the circus, I thought actually I'd probably do that for a year or two, because, it's circus, like I don't want to be a circus artist. I don't want to be a clown. And
Smell like cabbage, small hands.
no, and so what happened was the circus is performing, of course, and today's type of circus blends, it's multidisciplinary. So you're a performer, you're an actor, you're a singer, you're a musician, right? Being on stage, sometimes you're playing a guitar maybe or something like that, and then you do a flip. So it was very multidisciplinary, so acting was kind of part of it. Now, years later, that I'm pretty much retired from my circus career, I'm back to my original passion for acting and film, which I love.
Where does that take you? You're not doing circus anymore, right? 'Cause you're not touring with like circus companies or anything.
Right, yeah, I'm not doing circus full-time. I'm still teaching, I'm still doing my own training, but not a full-time performer.
Right. So kind of tying back into those times when you were saying no to Cirque because of this artist thing, that's sort of how I know you as well, as a creator, not just somebody that's playing as one piece in it. And a little bit of full circus, a little bit of full yeah, right, Freudian slip. A little bit full circle is that you, during the pandemic, wrote the script Shadow Circus, and produced this movie that you also act in, but you wrote, acted, and did a lot of, probably a poop ton of the post as well. And you have like a creator visionary mentality. So where is that taking you, like in the next year, 10 years, for the rest of your life? What does that look like?
Yeah, well, during the pandemic, I decided that one skill that I needed to learn was how to write a script. And it's not something you just learn in a few months. It's obviously its own craft in itself. But I wanted to learn the basics because I feel like that's sort of like making the blueprints for a house. And I think that if you understand that, at least to a degree, that's going to help augment and complement all the other areas of filmmaking, from acting to even the editing to the directing. So I wanted to put together a project for myself, which would test all sorts of different areas of filmmaking from the ground up. So starting with script writing, to producing it, to being in it, co-directing it, to editing. And I have a background in editing, so that part was okay. But editing narrative is different from editing commercial and corporate stuff. Then finalizing, even doing some of the music on it and tying it all together. It was a test for me to see what I really enjoyed, where my competencies lay, and also what, for my next project, what I need to like bring in for as a team. And one thing I feel really passionate about is to understand elements of every craft that everybody has to do, even though I'm not going to be an expert in them, but at least understand how it's done, so that when I'm either directing or producing or in some sort of leadership position, I can more effectively direct that and understand what that person's going through. So I'm not going to be a sound engineer, but if I can sit in on the sound sessions, I can understand what kind of work is entailed to do that. So what that brings me to as my next project is, one thing I've always wanted to do is to create a feature film. And that's why Shadow Circus was a 17-minute test, which I threw everything into. It was like a giant like mix, mash, smoothie, blend, circus, fight scenes. It was probably too much for a short film, but that my purpose was to throw as much as I could into it so I could test things and understand what I needed to do next on a larger project. So my next project will be a feature film, and I love action. I think action is a great modality for storytelling. It's entertaining, it's fun to do, and the other aspect that I really feel passionate about is comedy, because that's why I did a stand-up comedy class, to start to understand comedy a little better. And action and comedy, I think they go super well together. That's the circus. Like, the circus is action comedy. That's what the genre of circus is. And so there's that. And to tell a great story with a message that hopefully can be inspirational or aspirational.
Wow, very cool. Very well said. I'm going to put you on the hot seat for a second.
Please
do this with all the guests.
Yes.
The world is about to end, except 5 movies get to exist into the future, and that's it for the rest of life. So you have to pick 5 movies in 10 seconds. We're going to start the music now, and go.
Star Wars, Iron Man, Lord of the Rings. Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and Bruce Lee, Enter the Dragon.
Well done, my friend. That was a good catalog. You know what? I could live in that universe.
Oh man,
of those movies moving forward. Very good, man. You're such a ball of inspiration, and very fortunate to know you and hang out with you. And thank you so much for coming in and sharing with us. Love to have you back and do a follow-up and see where you get to with this feature.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Thanks for this interview.
Cheers, buddy.
Look into the camera.
That's
all right, guys. Thank you.
So now